Jake Morrison adjusted his dark blue uniform one last time before stepping into the massive council chamber. The human ambassador had been attending these meetings for 3 years now, and he was tired of the same arguments every single time. Today felt different, though, because today, the aliens had finally pushed too far. The chamber stretched out before him like a giant stadium with seats arranged in perfect circles going up toward the ceiling. Representatives from 47 different alien species sat in their special chairs designed for their unique body types. Some looked like giant insects with multiple arms and glowing eyes. Others resembled walking trees with bark-like skin and branches for fingers. A few species floated in tanks filled with strange colored liquids, while others needed special breathing masks to survive in the station's atmosphere. Morrison walked down the center aisle toward the speaking platform where a small podium waited. For him, his leather shoes clicked against the metal floor, making sharp sounds that echoed through the quiet chamber. Behind him followed 3 other humans, including Captain Lisa Hayes, who wore the crisp uniform of Earth's Space Navy. Her hand rested casually on her sidearm, though she knew weapons were supposedly forbidden in council meetings. The Galactic Council had been the supreme government of known space for over 800 years. When humans first made contact with alien civilizations 15 years ago, joining the council seemed like the obvious choice. Earth's leaders thought it would mean peace, trade, and sharing knowledge with advanced species who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. What they got instead was 3 years of insults, restrictions, and treatment that made it clear humans were considered barely civilized barbarians. The council had rules for everything humans could and could not do: where they could build colonies, what ships they could construct, which weapons they were allowed to carry, and even how many children human families were permitted to have. Morrison reached the podium and placed his hands on the smooth surface. He looked up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Some showed obvious disgust, while others displayed what might have been pity. A few species refused to even look in his direction, as if humans were beneath their notice entirely. Counselor Vexthara of the Zelani Collective rose from her seat in the front row. The Zelani looked like enormous purple spiders with too many legs and eyes that glowed like small suns. Her voice came through the translation system as a harsh, buzzing sound that somehow formed words humans could understand. The Council will now hear Resolution 847C regarding additional safety measures for the human species, she announced with what humans had learned to recognize as the Zelani version of a cruel smile. Given the recent incidents involving human military forces in the Tau Ceti system, this council believes stronger controls are necessary to prevent future violence. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. The incident in Tau Ceti had involved human ships defending a peaceful trading station from pirates. The humans had saved thousands of alien lives, but the council chose to focus on the fact that humans had used military force without asking permission first. Vexthara continued reading from a datapad held in one of her many appendages. Resolution 847C proposes the following measures. First, all human military personnel will be required to have neural compliance chips implanted in their brains. These chips will prevent humans from engaging in aggressive actions without direct approval from council oversight committees. A murmur of approval swept through many sections of the chamber. Morrison noticed that species who had once called themselves friends of humanity were nodding along with obvious satisfaction. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult they had thrown at his people before. Second, Vexthara went on, humans will be prohibited from establishing any new colonies beyond their current 12 inhabited worlds. The Council has determined that human expansion represents a threat to galactic stability and must be contained immediately. More voices joined in agreement. Morrison saw Ambassador Kirill of the Andorian Republic actually clapping his 4 hands together in celebration. The Andorians had been one of the first species to welcome humans into galactic society. Now they were cheering for rules that would essentially turn humanity into prisoners in their own small corner of space. Third, all human scientific research will be subject to immediate review and approval by Council science committees. Humans will no longer be permitted to develop new technologies without proper supervision from more experienced species. Captain Hayes stepped forward and whispered something in Morrison's ear. He nodded slightly but kept his expression carefully neutral. Around the chamber, representatives were beginning to smile and chatter excitedly among themselves as if they were watching entertainment rather than discussing the future of an entire species. Finally, Vextara said with obvious pleasure, humans will pay a special tax equal to 30% of their total economic output to fund a new galactic peacekeeping force designed to monitor and control dangerous species throughout Council. Space, the chamber erupted in cheers and applause. Alien voices rose in celebration as if the Council had just won a great victory against a terrible enemy. Morrison watched species that humanity had helped, traded with, and even fought beside, now celebrating rules that would reduce his people to little more than slaves. He thought about the human colonies that had shared their farming techniques with hungry alien worlds. He remembered the human doctors who had worked for years to develop cures for alien diseases. He considered the human engineers who had designed better faster-than-light engines that every species in the galaxy now used. In their ships, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The aliens had decided that humans were too dangerous to be treated as equals and too useful to be allowed to leave. They wanted humanity's knowledge and labor, but without giving humans any real voice in galactic affairs. Morrison looked down at the stack of papers on the podium. Treaties, trade agreements, and diplomatic protocols that had taken years to negotiate. Documents that were supposed to guarantee human rights and freedoms in galactic society. Papers that apparently meant nothing when the Council decided to ignore them. He picked up the entire stack and held it for a moment while the alien celebration continued around him. Then, with deliberate calm, Morrison began tearing the papers in half. The sound of ripping documents cut through the noise like a knife. The chamber fell silent as thousands of alien eyes focused on the human ambassador destroying years of diplomatic work. Morrison let the torn pieces fall to the floor like snow. Before stepping back from the podium, his voice carried clearly through the sudden quiet when he spoke. The human delegation formally withdraws from all Galactic Council proceedings, effective immediately. We renounce our membership and all associated treaties. Without another word, Morrison turned and walked toward the exit. Captain Hayes and the other humans fell in step behind him, their footsteps echoing through the stunned silence. Not one of them looked back as they left the chamber and headed for their ship. The age of human cooperation with the Galactic Council was over. Admiral Chris Baker stood on the bridge of the UES Defender watching the stars streak past through the main viewing screen. His ship was patrolling the contested Vega sector where 3 different alien species argued over mining rights to a cluster of asteroids rich in rare metals. The humans had been asked to keep the peace between the arguing parties for the past 6 months. The communication officer turned in her chair with a confused expression on her face. Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from Earth Command. It's marked as flash traffic with immediate compliance required. Baker frowned and walked over to read the message himself. Flash traffic was reserved for only the most urgent situations like alien invasions or system-wide emergencies. He had only seen such messages twice in his 20-year career. The text was short and to the point. All human vessels are ordered to cease current operations immediately and return to Earth space. No exceptions, no delays. Withdraw from all alien territories and report to Sol System within 72 hours. Execute Operation Homecoming immediately. The Admiral stared at the message for several seconds, trying to understand what could have happened to trigger such drastic orders. Operation Homecoming was a theoretical plan that had been developed years ago but never implemented. It involved the complete withdrawal of all human presence from alien space in case of a major diplomatic crisis. Communications, send this message to all human vessels in our patrol group. Begin immediate withdrawal to Earth space. Navigation, plot a course for Sol System, maximum speed. Within minutes, the Defender and her escort ships were turning away from the Vega sector. Behind them, the alien factions they had been peacekeeping between would have to solve their own problems without human intervention. Baker wondered how long it would take for shooting to start without neutral peacekeepers to keep the species apart across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out as human ships received the same orders. Captain Ryan Hayes, commanding the research vessel, used Discovery was studying strange energy readings near a black hole when his orders arrived. He immediately powered down all experiments and began the journey home, taking with him data that 3 alien species had been desperately hoping to share: the cargo ship UES Prosperity was delivering medical supplies to a plague-stricken alien world when Captain Tony Rodriguez got his recall message. The alien doctors begged him to complete the delivery since thousands of lives depended on the human-manufactured medicines. Rodriguez felt terrible about leaving, but his orders were clear and absolute on the scientific research. Station orbiting Kepler 186. Dr. Susan Wright was in the middle of breakthrough research on quantum tunnel engineering that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel. She had been working with alien scientists for 5 years on the project, and they were only months away from a major discovery that would benefit the entire galaxy. When her evacuation orders arrived, Wright began systematically destroying years of research. Her alien colleagues watched in shock as she deleted computer files, burned paper documents, and sealed her private laboratories with codes that only she knew. The alien scientists pleaded with her to at least share the basic principles of her work. "I'm sorry," Wright said as she packed her personal belongings into a single bag, "but this research belongs to humanity. If the Council wants to treat us like children who can't be trusted, then they don't deserve our knowledge." She left the station on the last human transport, taking with her the secrets that could have advanced galactic civilization by centuries. The alien scientists were left with incomplete data and no understanding of the complex equations that made human quantum engineering possible. Similar evacuations happened on hundreds of worlds throughout Council space. Human doctors abandoned alien hospitals, taking their advanced medical knowledge with them. Human engineers shut down the factories that produced the quantum processors that powered everything from alien starships to planetary communication networks on the agricultural world of Kepler 442b. Governor Ben Clark supervised the evacuation of the human colony that had transformed the planet from a barren wasteland into the food basket of 3 star systems. The native Kithran population had welcomed the humans 20 years ago. When their own crops were failing and millions faced starvation, human agricultural experts had introduced new farming techniques, better seeds, and irrigation systems that allowed the Kithrans to feed not only their own people but also export food to neighboring worlds. The grateful aliens had built monuments to human friendship and declared an annual celebration, honoring their human partners. Now Clark watched as the last human families boarded transport ships while Kithran officials begged them to reconsider. The alien governor offered the humans anything they wanted, including full ownership of half the planet, if they would only stay and continue teaching their farming methods. "We don't want your land," Clark explained to the desperate Kithran leader. "We just want to be treated with respect. Your people have always been good to us, but the Council has made it clear that humans are not welcome in galactic society." As the transports lifted off carrying away the knowledge that had fed billions of aliens, Clark knew that famine would likely return to this world within a few years. The Kithrans had become dependent on human expertise and would struggle to maintain the advanced agricultural systems without human guidance. The economic impact of the human withdrawal began almost immediately. Alien stock markets crashed as traders realized that critical supplies would no longer be available. Human-manufactured quantum processors powered the communication networks that allowed faster-than-light messages between star systems. Without regular shipments of these devices, the galactic internet began experiencing failures. Alien hospitals found themselves short of medicines that only human factories knew how to produce. The chemical formulas were closely guarded secrets that human companies had developed through years of expensive research. Several alien pharmaceutical corporations tried to reverse engineer the medicines but quickly discovered that human chemistry was far more advanced than they had realized. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly became dangerous as human security forces withdrew. Pirates and raiders who had been kept in check by human patrol ships began attacking merchant vessels with increasing boldness. Insurance rates for shipping companies skyrocketed as the galaxy became a more dangerous place almost overnight. On Earth, President Kelly Parker met with her military advisors to coordinate the largest evacuation in human history. Over 3,000 ships were making their way home carrying nearly 2 million humans who had been living and working throughout Council space. The logistics of housing and feeding so many returning citizens would be challenging, but Parker was determined that every human would make it home safely. The Council wanted us gone, she told her cabinet during an emergency meeting. They're about to learn what the galaxy looks like without human involvement. 6 months had passed since the last human ship departed alien space, and the galaxy had grown strangely quiet. The hyperspace communication network that connected thousands of worlds was beginning to fail in ways that nobody had expected. Warning. Lights flashed red on control panels throughout Council space as technicians struggled to understand systems that had worked perfectly for years. Chief Engineer Kixanol of the Hegemony stared at the massive communication array on Nexus Station with growing frustration. The organic circuits that managed faster-than-light messages were dying one by one, and his team had no idea how to fix them. The humans had designed most of the critical components, but had never shared the technical details with anyone else. Try rerouting power through the backup systems, Kixanol ordered his assistant, a young Trilaxian whose blue skin had turned pale with worry. They had been working for days without sleep trying to keep the communication network operational, but every solution they tried only delayed the inevitable collapse. The backup systems failed within hours, plunging entire sectors into communication darkness. Worlds that had been in constant contact for centuries suddenly found themselves isolated and alone. Trade agreements could not be negotiated, emergency calls for help went unanswered, and the carefully coordinated government of the Galactic Council began to fall apart on the frontier world of Vega Prime. Governor Zach Thie watched his planetary defense screens flicker and die as the security network went offline. Human technicians had installed the sophisticated sensors that could detect hostile ships from 3-star systems away. Without regular maintenance from experts who understood the technology, the early warning system had become useless scrap. Metal pirates who had been afraid to operate near Council worlds for decades suddenly realized that their targets were blind and defenseless. The merchant ship Starlight Prophet was attacked and destroyed just 2 light-years from Vega Prime without anyone knowing until the wreckage was discovered days later. The pirates had taken their time looting the cargo and murdering the crew. Knowing that no help would come, trade routes that had carried goods safely between worlds for generations became hunting grounds for raiders and criminals. The Kovani Republic lost 30% of their merchant fleet in a single month as attacks increased. Insurance companies stopped covering shipments to Outer Rim territories, where human patrol ships had once kept the peace. Council chairman Zormak of the Hegemony stood before an emergency session of the remaining council members, trying to maintain order as representatives shouted accusations at each other. Many species were demanding immediate action to force the humans to return, but nobody had any realistic ideas about how to accomplish such a task. The Trilaxian Federation's economy has collapsed, announced Ambassador Vril, his tentacles writhing with agitation. Our factories cannot produce anything without human-designed quantum processors. Our people are rioting in the streets as unemployment reaches 60%. Representative Kiss of the Zelani Collective, the same species that had proposed the neural control chips for humans, clicked her mandibles nervously. Perhaps we acted too hastily in our previous decisions regarding human participation in council affairs. The economic disruption was not anticipated in our calculations. Zormaxos' 4 eyes blazed with anger as he glared at the assembled representatives. Many of these same beings had cheered enthusiastically when the restrictions on humanity were announced. Now they were panicking because their short-sighted policies had backfired in spectacular fashion. The humans have severed all diplomatic contact, he reported grimly. Our ambassadors are turned away at the border of human space by automated defense platforms. They refuse to answer our messages or acknowledge our attempts at communication. What the chairman did not mention was how frightening those automated defenses had appeared to the scout ships that had tried to approach human territory. The alien vessels had been scanned by technologies that seemed impossibly advanced and then politely but firmly escorted away by robotic ships that moved with unnatural precision and speed. Long-range sensors were detecting massive construction projects deep in human space, but the resolution was too poor to determine what was being built. Entire star systems seemed to be surrounded by artificial structures that blocked detailed observation. Whatever the humans were doing, they were doing it on a scale that suggested preparation for something far beyond simple defense. Dr. Malvar of the Scientific Council presented his latest report on the technological crisis facing galactic civilization. Without human expertise, we are experiencing cascading failures in critical infrastructure throughout Council space. Our medical facilities lack the advanced medicines that human laboratories produced. Our transportation networks are breaking down without quantum processors that only human factories knew how to manufacture. The report painted a picture of a galactic society that had become dangerously dependent on human knowledge and industry without realizing it. Humans had quietly become essential to the functioning of modern civilization while being treated as junior partners who needed constant supervision and control. How long before a complete system collapse? Asked Chairman Zormuk, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Conservative estimates suggest 6 months before critical infrastructure fails permanently, Malvar replied. Optimistic projections give us perhaps 1 year if we can develop alternative technologies quickly. Enough. The assembled representatives fell silent as the magnitude of their mistake became clear. They had driven away the species that kept their civilization running because they were afraid of human military potential. Now they faced the choice between swallowing their pride and begging for human assistance or watching their advanced society crumble into primitive chaos. Commander Amy Foster had been the last human officer to maintain any contact with galactic authorities before the complete withdrawal. She had served as a liaison officer on a joint patrol ship that monitored the dangerous neutral zone between Council space and the territories of hostile alien empires. When the emergency session of the Council requested communication with human leadership, Foster was asked to deliver a message. She stood before the same chamber where Ambassador Morrison had walked away 6 months earlier and addressed the desperate alien representatives. Humanity has no quarrel with any species that wishes to coexist peacefully, she said in a calm voice that carried clearly through the silent chamber. However, we will no longer subsidize a system designed to exploit us. You wanted us gone and you have your wish. Foster paused to let her words sink in before continuing with the part of the message that would haunt the Council for years to come. The human government wishes to make clear that we consider our obligations to the Galactic Council completely fulfilled. Any future relationship between humanity and other species will be conducted on the basis of mutual respect and equality. Or not at all? She turned and walked out just as Morrison had done months before, leaving behind a chamber full of aliens who were finally beginning to understand what they had lost. The age of taking human cooperation for granted was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. General Krathmer of the Skarn Dominion studied the tactical displays showing the chaos spreading throughout Council space with predatory satisfaction. The Skarn were a militant species that resembled massive armored insects with razor-sharp claws and mandibles designed for tearing flesh. They had been kept in check by the Galactic Council's military forces for over 2 centuries, but now they saw opportunity in the growing weakness. The humans have abandoned their former colonies, reported his intelligence officer, a scarred veteran named Vexstar, whose left eye had been destroyed in their last major battle. 3 systems that were once human territories are now defended only by primitive alien militias with obsolete weapons. Krathmer's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a Skarn smile. The Dominion had always believed that might made right and that the strongest species should rule over the weak. The Council's peaceful policies had prevented them from expanding their territory for generations, but with human military power removed from the equation, the balance of force had shifted dramatically. "Prepare the war fleets," he ordered with barely contained excitement. "We will strike all three systems simultaneously before word can spread of our attacks. The galaxy will learn that the age of Skarn dominance has finally arrived." Within days, the most powerful military force in known space began moving toward targets that had once been under human protection. 5,000 warships armed with plasma cannons and fusion torpedoes advanced through hyperspace toward worlds that the Council had assured were now defenseless. The Skarn expected easy victories against inferior alien defenders who lacked proper military training. Admiral Vorthak commanded the assault on Kepler 442b, the former agricultural world where humans had taught the native Kithrans advanced farming techniques. Intelligence reports suggested the planet had no orbital defenses and only a few obsolete patrol boats for protection. The Skarn fleet dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find terrified aliens begging for mercy. Instead, they found themselves facing defensive systems that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. Automated weapons platforms materialized from empty space as if they had been invisible moments before. The platforms were sleek silver constructs that moved without any visible engines or reaction drives, shifting position with impossible grace and speed. "Unknown vessels you have entered a protected system," came a calm mechanical voice speaking perfect Skarn through their communication systems. "Withdraw immediately or defensive measures will be activated. This is your only warning." Vorthak laughed at what he assumed was a bluff by the desperate Kithrans. "All ships open fire on those pathetic defense platforms. Show these farmers what real military power looks like." The Skarn fleet unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma fire that should have vaporized the mysterious platforms instantly. Instead, the energy beams struck invisible barriers that absorbed the attacks and redirected them back at the attacking ships. Skarn warships found themselves being destroyed by their own weapons as the defensive systems turned their firepower against them. "Impossible," Vorthak screamed as his flagship's shields collapsed under fire from his own plasma cannons. "No technology in the galaxy can redirect energy attacks like that?" The automated platforms began their counterattack using weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics themselves. Beams of twisted spacetime reached out to touch Skarn vessels, causing them to implode as if crushed by invisible hands. Missiles that moved faster than light struck targets before the Skarn sensors could even detect their launch. Within minutes, the most feared military force in the galaxy was being systematically destroyed by robotic defenders that showed no emotion and gave no quarter. The artificial intelligences controlling the platforms predicted Skarn movements with supernatural accuracy, intercepting escape attempts before the alien commanders even issued the orders. Similar scenes played out in the other two targeted systems as Skarn fleets encountered the same impossible defenses. Automated systems that had been left behind by the departing humans activated the moment hostile forces entered the star systems. The technology was decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen before, demonstrating capabilities that made Council military experts question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Colonel Ryan Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Resolution, humanity's newest and most advanced warship, watching the battle recordings that were being transmitted throughout the galaxy. The sleek vessel hung in space just outside the combat zone, its stealth systems keeping it invisible to both the attacking Skarn and the automated defenses. "Should we intervene, sir?" asked his tactical officer as they watched Skarn ships being torn apart by weapons that rewrote the rules of physics. "The automated systems are being quite thorough in their response." Hayes shook his head as another group of enemy vessels was reduced to expanding clouds of debris. "Our orders are to observe and record only. The Council needs to understand what happens when someone threatens territories under human protection, even if we're no longer officially present." The battle was over within 6 hours as the last surviving Skarn ships limped away from systems they had expected to conquer easily. Of the 5,000 vessels that had begun the assault, fewer than 300 remained functional enough to make the journey home. The others had been reduced to scrap metal and floating wreckage by defensive systems that had Operated with ruthless efficiency, Hayes activated his ship's communication system to send a message that would be heard throughout the galaxy. His words were calm and measured but carried an undertone of steel that made them more frightening than any shouted threat. This is Colonel Hayes of the human military speaking to any surviving Skarn forces and to all other species monitoring these communications. The systems you just attacked were defended by automated platforms that represent obsolete human technology from over 20 years ago. These were not our current generation weapons, but rather old equipment we left behind to protect empty worlds. The Colonel paused to let the implications of his words sink in before continuing with a message that would haunt the nightmares of military planners throughout Council space. Consider what awaits any force that threatens inhabited human space with our modern defenses and active military personnel. The recordings of the battles spread across the galaxy faster than the news networks could broadcast them. Alien military. Experts studied the footage in stunned silence as they tried to understand. Weapons that seemed to operate on principles their science could not explain. Energy shields that absorbed attacks and redirected them back at attackers violated the basic laws of physics as the Council understood them. Space-time. Manipulation weapons that could crush starships like tin cans suggested a level of technological advancement that made the gap between human and alien capabilities seem like an unbridgeable chasm. The artificial intelligences controlling the platforms had demonstrated reaction times and tactical analysis that exceeded anything biological minds could achieve. Council Chairman Zormak received the battle reports in his private office and felt something he had never experienced before in his long political career: fear. Bone-deep terror at the realization that humanity had been holding back their true military capabilities during their entire membership in the Council. The species that the Council had tried to control with neural compliance chips and expansion. Restrictions possessed weapons that could have conquered the entire galaxy if they had chosen to use force instead of diplomacy. The humans had been playing by rules that limited their actions, while possessing the power to rewrite those rules at any time. As news of the Skarn defeat spread, a new understanding began to dawn on species throughout Council space. The humans had not needed the Council's protection or guidance. The Council had needed humanity's restraint. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the effects of their absence had grown beyond anyone's worst predictions. What had begun as economic disruption had evolved into complete civilizational collapse across much of Council space. Worlds that had been centers of learning and culture for centuries now struggled to maintain basic services. Like power generation and water purification, the Trilaxian Federation had been among the first major powers to fall. Their blue-skinned population had rioted when unemployment reached 80%, and their government could no longer provide food or medical care. The sophisticated orbital cities that had housed millions of beings were now dark and abandoned, as people fled to agricultural worlds where they could at least grow their own food on Nexus Station. Council Chairman Zormak stared out at the dying lights of what had once been the political center of the galaxy. Half the station's sections had been sealed off to conserve power since the quantum reactors were failing without human-manufactured replacement parts. Representatives from dozens of species had already abandoned their posts and returned to their homeworlds to deal with local crises. The few remaining Council members spent their time arguing about who was to blame for the disaster while their civilizations crumbled around them. Some pointed fingers at the Zelani Collective for proposing the restrictive measures that had driven humanity away. Others blamed the military leaders who had supported aggressive expansion policies that made humans feel threatened. "We must face reality," Zormak announced during what would be the final official session of the Galactic Council. "Our government no longer has the resources or authority to function. Individual species will need to negotiate directly with humanity if they hope to restore trade and technological cooperation." The admission marked the end of an institution that had ruled the galaxy for 800 years. The council that had once commanded fleets of starships and governed thousands of worlds was dissolving because they had underestimated the importance of a single species that they had tried to control. President Kelly Parker stood in the rows garden of the White House looking up at the stars that were visible even through Earth's atmosphere thanks to the advanced orbital telescopes that projected images directly into the sky. She had been elected on a platform of rebuilding humanity's relationship with the galaxy, but on terms that respected human dignity and independence. "Madam President," said her chief of staff as he approached with a tablet containing the day's intelligence reports. "We have another 12 requests for diplomatic contact from alien governments. The Corvani Republic is offering to recognize human sovereignty over 30 star systems if we'll just restart trade in quantum processors." Parker nodded thoughtfully as she reviewed the desperate offers flooding in from species that had once treated humans as dangerous children who needed constant supervision. The same aliens who had cheered for neural compliance chips were now begging for the chance to buy human technology at any price. "What about the Kithrans?" she asked, remembering the agricultural world where humans had taught advanced farming techniques to grateful aliens. "Are they still requesting humanitarian assistance?" "Yes, ma'am. Their crops are failing again without human expertise, and they're facing starvation within 6 months. They're offering complete autonomy for any human agricultural specialists willing to return, plus full ownership of any land they want to claim." The president considered the offer carefully. The Kithrans had always treated humans with respect, and had never supported the council's discriminatory policies. They deserved help, but any assistance would need to be provided under completely different terms than the old colonial relationships on the neutral world of Haven, a small planet that belonged to no major power. An unprecedented meeting was taking place. Representatives from 40 different alien species had gathered to meet with humanity's first diplomatic delegation since the Great Withdrawal. The aliens came not as equals negotiating mutual agreements, but as supplicants hoping to convince humans to resume some form of galactic involvement. Ambassador Jake Morrison, the same man who had walked out of the council chambers 2 years earlier, sat across from Chairman Zormak and the other surviving alien leaders. The human looked exactly the same, while many of the aliens showed signs of stress and poor nutrition caused by the ongoing economic collapse of their civilizations. "We made a grave error," Zormak admitted with an expression of shame that his species rarely displayed in public. "We believed humanity needed the Council more than the Council needed humanity. We were catastrophically wrong about the balance of dependence in our relationship." Morrison listened politely as alien leader after alien leader apologized for their past treatment of humanity and begged for a return to the old cooperative arrangements. Some offered huge payments in rare metals and exotic materials. Others promised to give humans complete control over entire star systems. A few even suggested that humans should take leadership roles in a reformed galactic government. "The Galactic Council, as you knew, it will never exist again," Morrison said, when the aliens had finished their desperate presentations. "Humanity will not rejoin an organization designed to limit our freedom and potential. However, we are prepared to establish bilateral relationships with any species willing to treat us as equals rather than subjects." The ambassador's words marked the beginning of a new age in galactic politics. Instead of one central authority controlling all interstellar relationships, the future would be built on individual agreements between humanity and other species based on mutual respect and shared benefits. "The Terran Cooperative will accept membership applications from any species that agrees to our basic principles," Morrison continued. "Equal representation, shared decision-making, mutual defense, and free trade based on fair exchange rather than exploitation." Many alien representatives immediately expressed interest in joining this new organization. The Kithrans were among the first to formally request membership, followed by several smaller species that had always been marginalized by the old council system. Even some major powers like the Andorian Republic began considering whether they should abandon the failing council structure. Over the following months, the Terran Cooperative grew rapidly as species chose to align themselves with humanity rather than cling to the dying remnants of the old galactic order. The new organization operated on completely different principles than the Council had used. Instead of central control and rigid hierarchies, The cooperative emphasized voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. Human technology began flowing to member species again, but under license agreements that ensured humans maintained control over their intellectual property. Quantum processors were manufactured in human factories and sold at fair prices rather than being given away for free as they had been during the Council era. Medical knowledge was shared through joint research programs that gave equal credit to all participants. Captain Tony Rodriguez of the UES Independence watched from his ship's bridge as another alien delegation arrived at Earth requesting membership in the cooperative. The sleek vessel that approached Terra's orbital stations carried representatives from a species that had once voted to restrict human expansion but now desperately needed human agricultural expertise to feed their starving population. Amazing how their attitude changed once they realized what they were losing, commented his tactical officer as they watched the alien ship dock with the diplomatic station. 6 months ago, they were calling us dangerous primitives. Now they're offering U.S. star systems just for the chance to buy our farming equipment. Rodriguez nodded as he considered how completely the balance of power had shifted in just 2 years. Humanity had done something that no military conquest could have achieved. They had simply walked away from a system that exploited them and let it collapse under its own contradictions. The galaxy was learning a lesson that would echo through history for generations to come. Sometimes the most powerful statement anyone could make was knowing when to leave the table and find better partners elsewhere. Respect could not be demanded or legislated, but it could definitely be earned by those who proved they deserved it.